Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Guillaume Renterghem, Managing Director at LifeSci Advisors, based in Switzerland. As a reference, LifeSci Advisors is an investor relation firm, and we have been working with Recce for now a good couple of years. Personally, as a background, I'm a pharmacist by training, and I spent 10 years on the sales side as a biotech analyst, mostly for UBS in Switzerland and London. And I used to cover actually antibiotic companies, so I'm relatively familiar with the antibiotic space. One thing actually, as a preamble, actually, I would like to discuss is the interest or the lack of interest of investors for antibiotics in general, I mean, historically, which is mostly due to the fact that although the development of antibiotics has a relatively high success rate, from a commercial point of view, the antibiotic space was hit by the fact that new antibiotics, because of the fear of resistance, tend to be kept last, right? So the peak sales, I mean, the sales trajectory of antibiotics tend to be relatively slow. Where I think actually Recce differentiates itself from the crowd is very much about the concept of almost no, I mean, conceptually, no likelihood of development of resistance. That's the difference between an antibiotic and an anti-infective, which Recce's compound is. And so therefore, I think that Recce, from a commercial point of view, will have actually a very differentiated commercial profile compared to the antibiotics as we know them. So I was asked actually to discuss the urinary tract infection market, okay, which sounds relatively silly, but is a very, very large market. Okay, it's one of the most common infectious disease. And while in most cases, actually, it's considered as a relatively mild infection, actually can go bad relatively fast, not only because of the lack of resistance, but as well the fact that women, mostly women, actually get reoccurrence over and over and over again. And sadly, for quite a few, actually ends up with kidney issues, kidney failures, and so on. As you may be aware, one of the most common infection is, this infection is caused mostly by a bacteria which is well known called Escherichia coli, that accounts for roughly 60 to 2/3 of the UTI infections. And that's basically a normal contamination from the gastrointestinal tract up to the genitalia and the urinary tract. While actually Escherichia coli used to be very sensitive to most of the classical antibiotics, the beta-lactamase, the beta-lactam, the tetracycline, and so on. Over the last 20 to 30 years, a significant increase in resistance has occurred. If you look at ampicillin, 86% now are resistant. 86% of Escherichia coli are resistant to ampicillin. Amoxicillin, 76%. I mean, it's a relatively old drug, but still, by the way, developed by GSK, tetracycline, and so on. I mean, you have the list here. Now, globally, actually, that's a very, very large issue that affect almost basically more than 400 million women in 2019 in the world, right? And from a cost point of view, while actually the cost of the antibiotics that I mentioned are mostly all genericized, if not all, still, so low price, it still costs $6 billion in direct healthcare expenditure, mostly related to the antibiotic treatments. What is more and more worrying is that the resistance level is relatively high, but it keeps on getting worse. One of the issues as well of women is that because UTI are so common and reoccurring, okay, they tend to use always the same antibiotics, creating actually more exposure to the bacteria, to the same antibiotics, therefore leading to more and more resistance. Okay, so and we end up actually with one key issue, which is 1 in 3 uncomplicated UTIs are resistant to Bactrim, which is considered to be one of the standard of care in UTI, and 1 in 5 now are resistant to 5 other common antibiotics. And so that's a very, very big issue, because if you look at the list of antibiotics, we are starting to run out of options for these women or for these patients. So if you look at the market of the UTI, so we know that the UTI cases are rising, okay, roughly 4-5% at the CAGR a year. That has to do with the population growth, more access to healthcare as well, more awareness, so more detection. But and so actually there's an increase cost, right? I mean, the market size was roughly $9 billion in 2020, and we do expect this market to go to 12 billion by 2027. If we look at specifically Australia, for our Australian colleague, it cost UTI alone almost $1 billion Australian dollars, and that was actually, I think, 2 years ago. There's been a number of players in the field, though, okay, of antibiotics, most notably actually GSK. I mean, you have the list here. So there's a big interest in UTI, yet the degree of clinical development in UTI has been relatively limited. All the commercial issue I was mentioning before. Now, there's one thing actually I would like to bring to your attention is the recent deals that was announced, right? That came as a big surprise of GSK entering an exclusive worldwide collaboration with Spero Therapeutics, who had actually developed and submitted for regulatory approval an antibiotics against complicated UTIs, right? And who paid actually $66 million upfront and additional milestone and tier royalties. And I'll come back to that later. What is interesting actually is that Spero had generated a positive phase 3 clinical trials. I mean, technically they demonstrated that they were statistically non-inferior, which is a standard FDA requirement, so non-inferior to the standard of care. And despite this positive trial, they submitted and received what we call a complete response letter from the FDA, questioning the quality of the data. However, following actually what they call an encouraging US FDA regulatory feedback regarding the next step of clinical development, okay, GSK thought it was doable to rerun a phase 3, right, and to generate sufficient data to get to regulatory approval. One thing is that, I mean, this drug from Spero will be the first oral carbapenem antibiotic to treat this indication, which is complicated urinary tract infection, okay? And that includes actually complications such as pyelonephritis, okay, so affecting the kidney. So if we go back actually to the details of the deal, and I think it's particularly interesting and gives you actually a bit of balance as to the sentiment of the market on the anti-infective space. So before the deal, right, was announced and following the complete response letter from the FDA, so basically the FDA refusing to approve Spero's treatments, the market cap of the company had fallen to $28 million, right? So it was not in great shape, but the deal actually with the $66 million upfront payment from GSK, and actually it's even more because it's 66 million cash plus 9 million equity investment, the market cap only increased to $73 million. So what's interesting is that indeed Spero will need to finance the phase 3, the new phase 3, but with the cash injected by GSK, they have the mean to run this phase 3. It could be actually a phase 3 that could be run actually relatively fast. Okay, I mean, they know the market, and it's as I said, it's a common infection, right? But so what's interesting is that the market cap only increased by 60% of what GSK had injected in cash, leaving alone any increase of probability of success, any impact of having GSK on board. GSK actually is very familiar with commercializing antibiotics, despite the fact that there's a lot of upcoming milestones and royalties and so on. So the market is still actually relatively dubious about the likelihood of having a drug, an antibiotics with a proper market. Okay, but what was interesting in this press release as well, it's really rare for companies, especially large cap companies, to allow to disclose actually much details about the upfront, about the milestone, and about the royalties on sales. Here on the right of the screen, actually I've listed, it's exactly a copy paste of the press release, where they list actually step by step the financials that Spero is eligible to receive. Okay, I mean, one thing which is interesting is as soon as a phase 3 will be delivered, right? One will argue in 2.5 years, probably. That's my assumption. Spero is eligible to receive $150 million, right? If we look statistically at the likelihood of having actually a positive phase 3, especially that they already had a positive phase 3 based on non-inferiority, that is relatively high probability of success, yet GSK feels comfortable to chop in actually this kind of amount. And the same actually once the drug is approved and the first commercial sales occur, then there will be an additional 150 million. Another thing which is interesting is that on top of the low single digits to low double digits royalties on sales, which one will argue is relatively low for a phase 3 compound, but still, even the history actually can be justified. GSK is happy as well to chop in up to $225 million. Okay, so I don't think actually that based on that, GSK think that it's going to be a mega blockbuster, 2-3 billion, right? But still, only in that indication, one will argue that they still expect to be between $500 and $1 billion, which is actually something that analysts don't really have. So to go back to it is that the market actually for anti-infectives is very important. This one actually is a carbapenem actually conceptually could develop resistance, unlike the Recce compound. And so despite that, actually, GSK, who is famously known for being good in developing antibiotics, is quite bullish on the market and is ready actually to put some capital at risk with measured risk and to move forward. So I think that the reason why I wanted to bring this GSK Spero deal here is that I think that the sentiment behind antibiotics is starting to change. The interest from pharma is increasing. And I think that Recce is very well positioned, not only from a clinical development point of view, but as well from a pure technical point of view with a low risk of resistant development to attract a lot of interest from commercial players in Europe and in the US. Thank you very much.